Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for this specific webinar that we are hosting together with the UCAN Institute or Mr. Rinus le Roux. It's really a privilege having all of you. We see that the participants are still slotting in, so we're definitely going to start within the next couple of minutes. Just a couple of arrangements for those who haven't heard. We have got a three-part series in this specific webinar that we're presenting together with Rinus. And the three-part series is basically obviously today and then next Friday, the 12th of March, during which my co-director Roman Shores will have his session together with Rinus. And the subject there will obviously be the basics of the offer to purchase and the deed of sale. And then we have a further discussion on the 19th of March by my other co-director, Mr. Eddie Smith, who will speak about the transfer process step-by-step guide. Now, we are really privileged to have Rinus le Roux couple up with us this specific time. I think Rinus le Roux needs no introduction. The UCAN Institute obviously representing a lot of corporate clients and providing an array of services, motivational as well as educational. So a real stern and stalwart person to have on board for purposes of our webinar. Just another arrangement, you will note that there's a Q&A slot or a Q&A thumbnail on top of your toolbar. You're more than welcome, if something springs to mind with regards to the presentation, to post us a question, and as far as possible we will try and accommodate your questions in this regard. And just a last aspect with regards to Rinus. Rinus obviously also an author of a numerous amount of books, the latest one being Surviving Rotten Cheese, which is a fantastic book, and I can really really propose that you read it. I think it's really insightful. And he also said with the last session where we work up to a climax, he will give away 3 of his books, which I think is a real great gift. So thank you for that, Rinus. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, my specific portion today relates to something that I think we really need to take cognizance of. And that is the concept of the Popi Act and the last leg of the Popi Act that obviously comes into effect on the 1st of July, 2021. And therefore, the reason that we have to have a look at exactly what it requires from you being the responsible parties and how we can put measures in place to obviously adhere to that portion of it. Now, for those who don't know, the Popi legislation itself is something that is not new. The Popi legislation is something that has been in effect since 2013 or 2014. So we have this piece of legislation being something quite old. And the last leg or the effective part of the Popi legislation is only now coming into effect. So it is important. Clayton, I wonder if you could help me just to share the presentation. It doesn't seem to be able to share, but be it as it may. What is important is that when we look at the Popi legislation or the Protection of Personal Information Act, as it's better known, the Popi legislation is something that aims at protecting clients' information more adequately and more sufficiently. Now, this is something that we haven't become accustomed to, and it's a huge problem, because I think we've been obtaining this information and using the information without regulation, and that poses a huge problem. I think first and foremost, we have to draw a distinction between the Popi legislation and direct marketing that falls within the ambit of the relevant Popi legislation or act, and that falls outside the act itself. And when we have a look at the Popi legislation and direct marketing in terms of this piece of legislation says that it is a means to approach a data subject, in other words, a person for purposes of marketing, You approach that data subject directly in offering in the ordinary course of your business your goods or your services. Or secondly, when you request this relevant person to make a donation, which is probably less applicable in your instance. Now, the Act clearly states that when you correspond with a client via electronic communication, this includes any text, voice, sound, or image sent over an electronic communications network, which is obviously stored on a network with the intention that that recipient should retrieve that relevant information. If that is the case, you are working per definition with something called electronic communication. Now, Section 69 of the Act clearly states that when you want to send electronic communication to a client, you have to have his written consent. This is prescribed in terms of Section 69 of the Act. So that's very important that you bear that in mind. Then, if you use electronic communication, which includes automatic calling machines, facsimiles, if you still use those, SMSs or emails, this falls within the same electronic communications category. Now, electronic communications, like we said, is prohibited unless you have the written consent. Now, I'm going to ask you just to park the idea a little bit of electronic communications as opposed to the alternative. Now, when you have a look at the requirement for purposes of consent, it is important that when you have one of two scenarios, when you firstly approach a relevant client, in other words, it's the first time that he is approached for purposes of sending any form of marketing material or communication to the relevant client. That would be very important, that you obtain that written consent. Now, the direct marketing consent can be obtained once. So you can contact a client basically with the main aim to obtain this consent. So the first approach is almost like a get out of jail free card. You can contact him and you can obtain his written consent for the purpose that you need his personal information. Now, the Popi Act provides for a so-called guideline or form in which I obtain this consent. And typically, ladies and gentlemen, it would be something to the effect of, I, the undersigned, voluntarily hereby give my personal consent to provide and use my personal information for the following purpose. And you will, in this written consent, you will elaborate as to what the need is. Why are you obtaining this relevant person's information? Is it because you need it for a purchase or a sale of a specific transaction or the like? And then further, this consent needs to provide further parties with whom you might share this information. So that's quite important. When I share the information, I, in typically your specific instances as estate agents and transferring attorneys in our instance, we would share this information with maybe bond originators, with the bond registration attorney, with transferring attorneys if it is not us, then financial institutions who need to approve the mortgage loan, and SARS, obviously, who needs to accept and to receive certain data for purposes of the relevant e-filing and payment of transfer duties. So I think the drift is very clear that you obviously need to expand as far as possible on this relevant consent to make sure that you can either utilize it in future again when you need to remarket to clients, or what you can do is you can obviously only limit it to a relevant transaction that you require it for. I mean, if I need a purchaser's personal particulars and I need to process that personal particulars for only this transaction, then so be it. I can restrict my written consent to that relevant area of the relevant transaction. Or I can widen it as far as possible to make provision for future use. So that's equally important. But now the second scenario is obviously where I approach a client who is already a client. He used to be a client because I've provided my services to him in the past. I provided a specific sale or a purchase. I facilitated a transaction, and therefore I would like to get hold of him again and provide my services, or to obviously give him information with regards to similar offerings that I might have, or investments that I might have available. Now, it's also important to realize that you have to give that relevant client the opportunity to refuse the further processing of his information or to receive your marketing information. That is important. So that's the reason why you normally have a website which consists out of an opt-out or a unsubscribe option, where the client can freely unsubscribe to your letter or to your marketing material. So you cannot bind him against his will, even though he used to be a client. Because remember, in terms of Popi, he provides you with the information and you are allowed to process it, but for a specific purpose. So this is not as if you can have a so-called clientele box where you can throw all the information in and keep it for a rainy day and dig it up and obviously then utilize the information over and over again. This is what Popi actually aims to restrict. And we need to obviously honor that and respect that as such. Now, what's equally important is that each and every client has the right to retract his relevant consent. So it's not only just the opt-out option or whatever the case may be, it is a retraction physically of that relevant consent that he provided. It might be for a multitude of reasons. It might be because the information is excessive, or it's irrelevant, or it's maybe incomplete, or it was just, like in most instances, obtained unlawfully. And I think that's going to pop up as a frequent problem in future after the 1st of July 2021, because I think the access we had to this information was not necessarily regulated. On the contrary, I think a lot of the information was unlawfully obtained. Let's be honest to one another. Now, I think the scenarios that I've sketched in this regard defines the way in which you need to determine whether you need consent or not when you send marketing material, depending on what medium and media you use. So that's equally important. Now, it's also important, if you have a look at section 19, that each responsible person who is obviously responsible for Popi in the office, whether it be an external person, whether it be an internal person, that person has got the responsibility to obviously put external risks or bear external risks in mind, and then put certain possible internal and external measures in place to curb those risks. So don't ask me exactly how it has to look like, but you have to have systems in place in terms of which you can identify possible risk areas, and that's of the utmost importance. Secondly, you've got to establish and maintain proper safeguards. You know, equally like FICA, we need to put clients at ease, to tell them how are we going to protect their personal information. And therefore, we need to put these specific systems in place. If you get a pop-in visit from the regulator in terms of Popi, you need to explain to him exactly what type of measures you've got in place, what systems you've got in place to obviously keep these informations and clientele's information at bay and safe. And then you've got to regularly verify these systems and then regularly update them as well. So it's not as if you can put something in place and keep it there forever and hope that it obviously ring fences the information and safeguards it. It needs to be safeguarded by means of updated systems from time to time. Now, for those who don't have those systems in place, there are external companies that assist you in writing a formal manual, which obviously complies with Popi and would give you a guidance manual as responsible person to educate your personnel or subjects who would obviously have to report to you as the responsible person. Now, I think it's also important that if you have a look at the responsible party, he would have to provide access of this information to the rest of his subjects, but have to have these systems in place as to make sure that they do not breach the relevant requirements and so forth. So you can imagine it's quite an important function to be a responsible person in terms of Popi, and it's therefore very important that you have the necessary knowledge of the relevant act. Now, the personal information must be collected directly from the data subject. Now, this is quite something interesting, because we have been using bulk services to obtain personal information up to date. We've received this information from different networks and different suppliers. Let's call them by name: Searchworks, Windeed, Lightstone. We even use ITC to obtain personal contact details of clients. So we have obtained this information bulk, and it seems that Popi, at this current stage, with the last leg coming into effect, is trying to curb that. They're trying to ensure that you obtain that information from the data subject yourself in person, and not to obtain it from a bulk network somewhere, someplace. So they want to ensure that if you use that personal information, that the personal information has been obtained, and the consent, obviously, together with that, has been obtained from the data subject, him or herself. And that's quite important, unless you could obviously show that you've obtained that information from a public domain. Now, I think we got away with murder up to date by getting that client the unwanted, unsolicited call, and then when he gets a fit and asks you where you get his information, you say that I've got it from the deeds office, which is a public domain. It's partially true. Obviously, the deeds office is a public domain, but it only provides information on a public basis up to a certain point. And from there on, you would require a consent from a relevant client if you want to go into contact details, if that relevant medium or social platform provides that information. So, so many people like to tell you that, no, we've got your information from a central consumer database. Now, I truly do not know of such a database that exists, and I have definitely, in my personal capacity, never gave somebody a consent, written or verbal, to put my name on such a database. So we are running out of excuses a little bit to use the public domain as an excuse, but it will still be. So if a client has already posted his relevant contact information on a public domain, on a public database, that would be the scapegoat, obviously, to say that I have got the right to use it because it is governed by a public domain. Now, this public domain, it needs to be controlled by a public body. It's not necessary that that public body has to be the creator of the public domain. They can basically just manage it, like the deeds office. The deeds office did not necessarily write the software for purposes of use, but they regulate that specific use of the software and access to that information. Now, businesses and agencies may equally, according to the Popi legislation, not store personal information for a longer period than is really necessary. And this all boils back to the concept of, how does your consent look like? The consent that was provided by the relevant data subject, how does that look? Because if he consented to future use of the relevant personal information, then I can store it for an unlimited period of time. But if he gave me the consent to use it purely for a sale or a purchase, and that sale and purchase is now done and dusted, then I need to go back and I need to store his information purely just for the rest of the period that another statute might require me to do so, 5 or 7 years. But I cannot utilize his personal information for a repeat transaction or for repeat marketing unless my consent is wide enough to do that. So that obviously being a bit of a flip side, and I think a negative out of Popi, because we used to take our clients and store the information, and then when we require it, we dust it off and we obviously get them on board again on our public domain, which seems to be what Popi is going to curb in this specific instance. Now, the platform obviously needs to be created by the relevant person in charge of Popi of the office. So that system needs to be in place. It needs to be maintained, and it needs to be upkept and regularly revisited. Now, I think a lot of host companies obviously are equally worried at this current stage, because the host companies such as Lightstone and Windeed, they've equally obtained large amounts of personal data, and they sell it at a bulk basis to end users like you and me. We are all members and we use Windeed, we use Searchworks, we use the Lightstone platforms as such. But do we really know whether that information that is provided and which can be accessed has been regularly or lawfully obtained at the end of the day? That question still remains to be seen. Now, if there's a non-compliance of this specific piece of legislation, what happens then? In terms of Section 74 of the Act, there's a regulator that was obviously created, and the regulator, being a person with its subcommittees, has got serious powers in terms of the Act. Now, the regulator can entertain any complaint from a data subject. So if you literally harass a person and he's not happy or he didn't provide his consent as required in terms of the Act, he can lay a complaint at the regulator, and the regulator has statutory powers. The regulator can go and he can investigate this specific claim. He can then refer it to the so-called enforcement committee. Now, the enforcement committee, we don't know exactly how effective they will be, but I haven't seen groundbreaking work that they have done up to date. But be it as it may, they are definitely a statutory body that can deal with complaints. And then the regulator can refer something to the High Court. He can institute a civil claim against a wrongdoer or a transgressor. And last but not least, and I think this is where it scares the living daylights out of us, is the fact that he can issue a so-called infringement notice upon you for transgressing the Act, and he can impose a fine which is limited to 10 million rand. Now, we've seen in the past that FICA legislation, which has penalties up to 100 million, and now in terms of Popi, 10 million is enough to cripple any business. So the question is whether you want to jump that moral hurdle to obviously obtain information unlawfully and transgress the Popi legislation and expose yourself or your company to that punitive measure. That is something that only yourself can answer. And how effective the regulator would be in policing this piece of legislation, that obviously is where the proof is in the pudding at the end of the day. But I think that it obviously states how urgent it is that we have to enforce this piece of legislation, and that we have to have a look at how we got to get our systems in place. Now, to get back to those people who don't want to be contacted again, when we contact a person, first and foremost to obtain the written consent as prescribed in Section 69, then it goes further to say that we would have to have a system in place to categorize these people if they don't want to be bothered again. A so-called no-go list, a no-contact list, or a blocked database list. It's important that that relevant person has to be placed on that list, and that all the subjects under the responsible person has to have access to that specific list, so that we don't have a duplication and constant infringements of the requirements in terms of the Act, because that's obviously going to cause a lot of complaints being lodged against an institution if you don't adhere to it. So that forms part of the system. And ladies and gentlemen, the principle is that these systems need to be in place by the 1st of July 2021. That's of the utmost importance. And that's the reason why we're talking to you today about these systems being in place and the last leg of Popi obviously coming into effect. Now, let's just go a little bit back as to the alternative which I spoke about as to electronic communication, because we already know that for electronic communication, and when I send my relevant marketing material to a data subject, then in that regard, I need his written consent. But the Act does not cover telephone calls. That's quite interesting. Now, the definition of direct marketing via electronic communications do not cover telephone calls because it's not an electronic form. So if I contact a client first, there's no infringement, and I don't need a written consent to contact him. But the problem that we have is that although cold calling, which is an integral part of your marketing, seems to be permissible and it's not an infringement or prohibited by the Act, It's still required that the information that estate agents obtain for this cold calling must be obtained in accordance with the measures and protocols of the Popi Act. So to put it bluntly, the question is how did you obtain his particulars? Did you obtain his particulars on a public database? Did you obtain his particulars on or in a telephone directory where he already consented to post his personal contact particulars? Did you maybe obtain his information on a Facebook web page in terms of which he already provided his personal information, which can equally be described as a public domain? So I think the gathering of that information is of the utmost importance, and that is something that we have to bear in mind. So the good news is cold calling is still permitted, and you can cold call, but the question is if you receive bulk personal contact details from a relevant service provider, how was that information obtained? And is it obtained lawfully in terms of Popi itself? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think a lot of these data subjects or companies who provide bulk services, and I'm talking about Lightstone, Windeed, Searchworks, we've spoken to them. I had a Zoom meeting with the regional manager of Lightstone last week to say, how are you approaching the 1st of July 2021? Because we know that you get a system, and maybe you will know better than I do because I'm not a user of Lightstone, but bulk easy contract or contact reports. Now, this bulk easy reports apparently gives you access to personal contact details. And I've asked her, how are you going to approach that? Because you don't actually know if this information has been obtained. She then basically said that, yes, we do obtain this information from a multitude of providers, such as credit bureaus, even financial institutions, municipalities, etc. And they are busy currently on a high level of negotiation with these suppliers to determine, are they comfortable how this information is gathered by those suppliers? So I think it's a chain of events that their suppliers provide the information and they again provide it to you. But what I've done is I've done one of these searches on one of the search engines, and I have basically did my own particulars. I put my own particulars in on the system, and I was then met with a click wrap box. And I would like to read to you what it says. It says, by ticking this box, I confirm that any personal information obtained from this search may not be used for marketing purposes and will be processed in terms of the South African data protection laws, including Popi. So what it basically comes down to is that some of these service providers are shifting the buck. They are basically moving the responsibility for compliance with Popi to you, the end user, the subscriber. So if you cross that model hurdle by ticking the box, it will centralize and register in some sorts of a database. And if it ever becomes an issue of contention, then they will go back and say, oh, Johan Muller of Snyman de Jager has ticked the box saying that he did have the necessary consent per se. Now, I strongly believe that this will not necessarily exonerate those service suppliers from their responsibility to obtain the information in accordance with Popi. But it seems to be a temporary solution, though. So the answer from Lightstone was that we first have to negotiate with our suppliers. If we are not comfortable with the way in which they collect and supply the information, we will discontinue that service, which I think would be a huge drawback because, let's face it, the reason why you have subscribed to Lightstone is obviously to get the personal contact particulars of a client so that you can contact him on a cold call basis. And if that service is not provided, you can only use the balance of the services. And if there is no reason for that, they will lose clientele. Or they are going to go, all of them, to the click wrap box system where they're going to put the responsibility on you and me to tick the box. So, ladies and gentlemen, either which way, I think compliance with the Popi legislation is of the utmost importance. And I think in the light of the aforementioned, the issue faced by estate agents is where and by what means they would receive the information for cold call purposes. But in the event The Popi Act itself now, I think, places greater emphasis on the protection and the dignity and the integrity of persons' information. And we have to take cognizance of it. Otherwise, we are going to run into a spot of bother. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And it now gives me great pleasure to hand over to a friend of mine, Rinus le Roux, and I'm sure he's going to be able to entertain us thoroughly with his pearls of wisdom. Rinus, over to you.
Thank you, Johan. Good morning, everybody. Hope everything is going well at your side. I'm now very worried, Johan. I don't know what to do because I use all the methods that you said I shouldn't use. And yeah, but there's one thing going for us. This is South Africa. So maybe they won't zoom in us too quickly. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining, and lots of people on here that I know and that I've worked with. Thank you very much for listening to me again. When I spoke to Johan about what I'm going to say, I said to him, I'm going to start with a little personal story, and that's the whole thing of what happened. And I don't know if you know what the mayor of Hiroshima said when the bomb hit. There he said, "What the hell was this?" And that's not the word he used. So the wonderful pandemic, the lockdown came, and I'm not going to talk about COVID, so don't worry. The lockdown came for me on the night of the lockdown, 11 o'clock that night. My wife chased the builders out of the house. We moved in that afternoon with half of our stuff. And here we are in the house that is almost finished, renovated, and they're still busy cleaning and putting up doors, 9 o'clock at night. And then Naleen said, "This is enough. You guys must now get out of here." And we closed the gates, and here we sit in our little house, just moved in, first night, boxes all over, and it was lockdown. And I was still fairly positive because I would go and sleep now because I was tired. And tomorrow I can now go through these things and say to myself, how would I navigate my life here? That's when I open up the bathroom tap, and out of the cold water came hot water, and hot water, there was nothing. When I realized this is going to be a tough lockdown because nobody knows who's essential services and stuff like that, then I wanted to plug in my phone to charge, and half of the plugs didn't work. And I kind of wondered, what would it take to get through this? Why would I actually live through this? Because this is just too much for me. I woke up the next morning and the shortage was in the garden. I couldn't find anybody to help me. And my life started in lockdown terribly. The worst thing is I couldn't find my braai, and they didn't deliver my braai. My braai was gone. So the only safe place I had was my braai, and I couldn't find it. So, ladies and gentlemen, my beginning of lockdown was terrible, really terrible. And I was wondering, what was this about? The next morning at 5 o'clock, I was sitting on my couch and I was thinking, will I get through this? And I'm a fairly emotional person. For those of you that know me, I always say I cry when the credits of Days of Our Lives come up. But I sat there and I didn't cry. I just felt completely helpless. I was thinking to myself, this is going to be interesting. And yes, it was. And I want to start off by telling you what is really interesting to me. The first thing, I call it the big, small issues. When you take away luxuries like alcohol and tobacco, we have seen that people go completely and utterly insane. And I know there are many of you that use that, and so do I, but all of a sudden, we had a stoppage of what we were used to. And we're not supposed to smoke, and we were not supposed to use alcohol. And many years ago, I don't know if you remember the first Big Brother, I was one of the psychologists that worked with Endemol at that stage. And they said to me one day, they said, how do we get these people to really act out? How do we get them to give some entertainment? And I said to them, it's very easy. Take away the alcohol and ration them on food, and you'll see what happens. And then all of a sudden, you give the alcohol back, and you'll see they'll all be drunk, and you'll have something to watch. That worked perfectly well. And I think it was the same with all of us. We were making pineapple beer and all sorts of weird things. And I know Johan very well. I know he's got a celery of wine, so I know he didn't suffer with that. But some other people obviously did, especially if you drink Lieberstein or something like that. You don't keep many bottles of that in your fridge or wherever. But those were the small, big issues. And for me, the most important thing was what was happening to this part, to the mindset. And that we saw very well. The first thing that happened was we became a little bit anxious because we have never experienced this in our lives. So the mind became a little bit worried about what can we do to get through this. And let me tell you what happens in mind fog. What happens in mind fog is the prefrontal cortex of your brain is looking for an answer. And the answer should be, this is what I should be doing. This is how I get out of this. Of course, none of us has ever experienced this, so the prefrontal cortex of the brain cannot find the answer. It then goes to the back of the brain, all the files, and say, let's see if this has happened before. And it starts paging through the back of the brain and see anything that we can relate to. Obviously, there was nothing to relate to. Then, in addition to this, we go and buy food, or we have it delivered, and we've got gloves on, and then we shouldn't put gloves on, and then we've got masks on, and people are running out, and they don't want to see each other, and all of this is playing on our minds. And with the mind going backwards and forwards to find answers, that creates brain fog. So I must admit I had that too, and I think lots of us just had it. Can this just be over? Because this is just too much. Now, the part that is the most scary of what we went through is the abuse. So now you've got mom that's at home, but dad is also at home. And dad is a person who does stuff. Now he's under mom's feet. And the dog is there, and the cat is there, and the children are there, and you find out that the children that you made you don't like anymore, and the person that you married you also don't like anymore. So imagine newlyweds going through this. It must have been, yeah. Johan, you guys must have been very busy with divorces and stuff like that. But worse than that was that the helpline for abuse picked up with 60% in the first month. So there was serious abuse. And I like that little meme that was on Facebook that said the daughter asked the dad, Dad, if I give you two options, the first option is you stay with mom during lockdown. And he said, I'll take the second option. It's fine, whatever it may be. And I think we found out that this little ecosystem that we are used to is not as friendly as we thought. And with all the stress of, am I going to lose my job? What's going to happen to my business? And especially for you guys that deal with estate, what will be happening? And I went through exactly the same. In the first month of COVID, 39 of my paid talks were cancelled. That's almost half of my income for the year. So I thought, what can I do? What is there to do? Well, I decided what I do best. I was going to write a book. So that will occupy my mind and I don't have to worry about anything. I wrote the book. The fact is that we all suffered with that thing that says, I've got mind fog, and how do I get through this? And if I don't get through this, this may be detrimental to my health. It may be detrimental to my business, to my relationships. So everything we knew about was under siege from this. And I think what I want to share with you in the positive sense is what is new, and then what can we do of some of these things. So the first thing that I thought what was new with this thing that happened was a drop in trust. And never did the song, The Wall, came so clearly into my mind. Mother, should I trust the government? Mother, should I run for president? Mother, do you think they're going to break my balls? And that was it. What was going to happen to us? And that drop in trust in government, drop in trust in businesses, drop in trust of the UIF, all of these things had a major impact on how we see and how we feel about life. And you know that in times of distrust, what do you offer your client? You offer them trust. So at the one end where the trust was extremely low, it was a major opportunity for estate agents like yourself to maybe build the relationship and show that you can be trusted. And that was what we wanted. And I know you couldn't go out, you couldn't go show houses, and it was a terrible time. But the good news was that I spoke to a few people just after the first few months, and it's when they dropped from 5 to I think 3 or whatever. You guys had some good times, and I think the reason why you had the good times maybe was because you've already had those trust relationships in place. So when trust drops, especially in the government, and especially with the corruption that we went through, people are looking for some beacon of hope, of trust. And if you became that beacon due to your personal relationships with people, I think you were in a good position. The second thing that happened was the whole world became unstable. So stability was not there. So we all know that in an unstable phase of anything, there's opportunity. So if you were wide awake and you said, well, seeing that this is unstable, what can I do now? Is there something that I can provide that is stable? And I watched quite a few people sending out, estate agents, sending out positive messages. And I don't know if they were allowed to do that according to the Popi Act, Johan, but nevertheless, I enjoyed it. And it actually gave me an amazing idea. I thought, well, let me start recording these wonderful messages and send it to people. And I got tremendous good feedback on this COVID thing, providing people with some sort of a stable mindset that said, we will get through this. I started a group on Facebook called We Will Be Okay. And I posted some videos. And the response were amazing because people needed that level of stability. And it's not just me that can provide it. If you have a trust relationship with someone, you can provide that stability. So at the same time, we were, I don't know when, we were downgraded again, South Africa, that made us more unstable. We were worried that people were just going to drop their stuff and leave, but they couldn't. So all of these mental aspects were plaguing us. And I think one of the good things that came out from this, what was new, was there was less reckless spending. So families found out that they can cook together. Families found out that they can do stuff that would bind the family better. They don't all shoot in a direction Friday night at 6 o'clock, especially if you've got children, and you again see each other again on Sunday afternoon. They started doing things that was for the family. And I think that's amazing. And no more eating out, no more just going to sit in a restaurant doing nothing. So family time became a priority, which I believe was nice. A few artists did the right thing. They said, if you pay $50 or $100, the whole family can watch tonight when I do a show. We did a few of those. And I would actually love to hear what is it that you guys did on Friday and Saturday nights during the lockdown, getting out of your pajamas and doing something productive. We also found out that there were new markets that were opening up. So if there's one group of people that I don't understand at all, then it is the millennials. I don't think I actually like them, but leave it there. So the millennials, they like to work with online stuff, and there was your opportunity. There was a new market that opened up. They like virtual tours. They like to do things on an electronic basis. So within this, we all had to sharpen our electronic and multimedia and whatever skills. I'm a complete dodo when it comes to these things, but I had to. And we had to find new ways of doing business. And right now, we are doing this over a Zoom meeting. Snyman de Jager decided, well, we need to have contact with our clients. We need to engage them. And this is a new way of doing business. And I must say, I would have loved to rather see you all together and stand on a stage and interact with you, because then I can see when you're leaving and I can make a joke and ask you if you didn't get the joke or something like that. I could play with you. Now I see myself and I see Johan on my right-hand side, and the only gauge I've got is his occasional smile, which coming from a friend is, subjective. So I don't know what is happening with you, but this has given me a new opportunity, a new way of doing business. And at the same time, I was thinking about a estate agent. How would he or she multiply on their income? And seeing that we moved in under lockdown, I thought maybe it would have been nice for our estate agent to offer me a security service, someone to cut the keys for the house, new keys for the house, to help with a little bit of painting, to help with the electrical fence that didn't work, things like that. And I saw you guys do amazing things. In fact, in the book, Surviving Rotten Cheese, I've got a whole chapter of estate agents and how, and the book is written from a perspective of Master Aha, giving some advice. And how could estate agents use this opportunity? I think under the new stuff, the last one is new mindset, new behavior. Wow. And I know, ladies and gents, that we all would like to go back to the previous normal. I think both you and I know by now that it's over. I had a long conversation with one of my clients in banking. They are selling their properties, the big properties. They are going to put bachelors and one-bedroom flats in these things. People are working from home. They work with an amazing thing that's called, I think it's called iris control. So when you're a collector at the bank, you're supposed to handle X amount of calls and be in front of your computer. When you take your eyes away from the computer, it registers and your supervisor can see that you are not there. Interesting stuff. So this is the new mindset and the new behavior. So now this mother is sitting at home. Thank God the children has gone back to school, but she can sit in her pajamas the whole day doing collections. And what will this behavior be? And I think in the next session next week, I'm going to tell you about what happens if you sit in your pajamas and why you shouldn't. Well, now we're on level 1, but imagine being a call center agent. So the new behavior would be, how do I take what has happened in this world and apply it to who I am and how I do business? And maybe in this whole process, there is something that is beneficial to me. And maybe I can generate some more income from this. Maybe I have learned a way to do business that is as additional to the old way of doing business. And I know we are creatures of habit. We love to do things the same way over and over again. And I think at best, this has given us the opportunity to shake out who we think we are, what we believe about what we can do and what we can't do. I was extremely proud of myself to be able to create in lockdown 2 additional multimedia programs that I sold into the big banks. And I was thankful that I could do that. So when we go through crisis and we do not learn that crisis means nothing, when we go through crisis and we do learn, it gives us a new behavior and a new way of doing business. And I think that is extremely good. So my last section for today, I want to talk to you about the mental muscle toolkit. The mental muscle toolkit. So I don't know, maybe you want to send me a note there. Somebody said to me, please don't use the word mental. Coming from psychological background, mental for me is just something that's in the head. I know the town I come from, if somebody said to you, you're mental, you're in trouble. So maybe just let me know what you think of the word mental. So the first thing that I've said under the mental muscle toolkit is that hope and survival are not strategies. Can't be. Hope and survival are not strategies. I want you to hear me here. So Jack Ma when he was asked in the beginning of the pandemic, what should we do in 2020? He said, keep it steady. Do not go wild. Do not do stuff that's out of the ordinary. Keep it steady. And I'm talking about this now, okay? So work with yourself. Try and keep that norm. Don't drop below and don't go too high, because both of them will be detrimental. Here you're going to fall flat because there are external forces that's impacting on you. And if you go too low, you will become depressed and you will become anxious and all sorts of things. Just a matter of interest, I phoned a few medical professionals. In the time last year, I don't know if you know this, but very little flu medicine was sold. So the flu medicine producers are about nothing was sold in flu medicine. And the thing that was sold the most was anything that would calm for depression. And the illness that came out the most was shingles. And we know shingles come a lot from tension. So when you're in that space where you are mentally tired and you're uncertain, you follow a strategy of just surviving or just getting through. But now that we're at this point, I still see companies and I still see people who are in a survival stroke hope phase. It's now the time to up the game. To give you an idea, at Eskom, I think something like 12,000 people left the big building, the Eskom building, without their laptops. Without their laptops, ladies and gentlemen. 12,000 people are sitting at home for more than a year doing squat. How do you think we're going to re-energize those people to get back into the system? We're not. So on a personal level, you've gone through a year of survival. You've gone through a year of weird stuff. Now is the time to write that great strategy, to start thinking, what am I going to do into the future, incorporating that what you've already learned, because that's important. You've learned this already. And then come up with that strategy for yourself to get into the future. And here's the important thing with all great strategists is they take historical information and they use it to project into the future. So what happens if a third or a fourth wave do hit us, or if another virus do hit us again in the future? And if we listen to Bill Gates, you'll know that it's going to happen. The second thing under the mental muscle toolkit is to fight back. I don't know if you follow a man with the name of Jordan Peterson, a bit controversial, a bit conservative, but if you do get to listen to some of his stuff, amazing psychologist. And Jordan Peterson say that when you do not fight back, the mind becomes complacent. The mind becomes a victim. Now, I wrote a book about meaning many years ago. How do we create meaning? And the one thing that I used often was that you cannot be a sitting duck. You have to affect life. You cannot only allow life to affect you. Now, for you to affect life in a pandemic, you need to fight back, and that fighting back comes from here. So for those of you who have got children, and some of those children have been bullied maybe, you would know that any good facilitator or psychologist will tell you, in some way, you have to fight back. You can't retract all the time, because that will make you weak. So I was in standard 7. There was a guy in Matric who found it very, very, pleasurable to every afternoon give me a slap on the back or hit me with a head on the back of my head. I don't know. He just bullied me, okay? And I really suffered from that. And at one point, my dad, who was the most loving person on the planet, said to me, Rinus, you're going to have to fight back. I think I told you guys before, I come from Carletonville. My first fight in Carletonville was against a girl, and she won. And so I knew that this was going to be a serious fight. And at that stage, I did karate, and we all had a set of nunchaka sticks. Yeah, I got that guy with that pair of nunchaka sticks. I thought I was Bruce Lee. He thought I was Bruce Lee too. He never bullied me again. So fighting back is that thing that says, no, I've had enough of this. I am now going to activate everything I've got, my energy system, to move forward. I'm not going to be the sitting duck. I'm going to affect life. Next one. Now you're going to say, but Rinus, this is contradiction in terms. It isn't. It's called acceptance. Something I struggle with. I struggle with accepting that I can't be friends with certain people who have passed. I struggle to accept that I've made wrong choices in my life. So acceptance is a major learning. But let me tell you something about acceptance that is extremely positive. When you accept, it doesn't mean that you give up, that you surrender. When you accept, you say to yourself, I hear and I understand what has happened. And I accept that. But, and there's a but. And you know what they say, if there's a but in any sentence, you disregard the first part, and there's a but. I accept that this is COVID. I accept that we're in a new way to work. I accept that we've gone through a tough time. I accept that. I accept the cards that's been dealt to me. But now, watch me play them. And that's what acceptance is about. Acceptance is when you stop mingling the stuff in your head. Why did this happen? What am I going to do about it? It's unacceptable to me. Acceptance is, I got it. This happened. But how will I go forward? And that's what acceptance is about. And right after acceptance, I've got here detachment. Another thing that I struggle with tremendously. To detach. Now, if you still attached to the person you were a year ago, you are doing yourself a big injustice. You have grown. You've experienced something that your peers and your mother and your father, none have experienced. None of them have gone through this pandemic. We have gone through that. I feel for people that was in matric last year, but they can put on their CV, I've done this. I have changed as a human being. I have incorporated these things, and I have detached from the old me. I have grown in this process. So detachment says, excuse me, detachment says that I'm not going to hold on to this baggage. The fact is, a friend of mine told me many years ago, he said to me, Rinus, when it comes to baggage, it's like being on a train. All your baggage stays with you anyway. You don't have to hold on to it. You can put it down. When you arrive at the next station, your baggage will arrive with you. You don't have to hold it up. So all of this stuff is part of us, but some people choose to carry it. They want to be angry about what happened. I want to be angry about what's happened last year. But this is a new year, and we are in the process of having a new strategy. So that detachment is extremely important. Then the magic thing that I've been saying for many, many, many years that I want to share with you right now is I hope some of you switched off the media. How do we get rid of fear? We put off the TV. That's how we get rid of fear. So I want to share something with you that I found extremely interesting. So I don't know if you know how the media works. There's a reason why they call a program because it is programming you. You are saying, let me listen to this so I can be part of the people who are experiencing this and I can up my fear. Now, have you ever seen a front page with good news? You haven't. You won't. Never. Let me tell you why. In our brains, there's a thing called the amygdala. This very old part of the brain was there to protect us. It is there to protect us. So you drive in your car, you're very relaxed, and you're sitting in the traffic, and you're talking on your phone, and the next minute, the brake lights of the person in front of you goes on. Immediately, your reptile brain goes on the brakes and you brake in time. What happened? Your amygdala said there was something in front of you that's going to harm or potentially harm you as a person. When we were living in caves and we dragged women by the hair and gave them babies, we were very reliant on the amygdala. Because if something moved there in the grass, it was not going to be your cat. It's going to be something else. And you had to be prepared to act out. Fear must happen. You have to act out. And right after fear, what comes after fear? Anger. Why the hell did you stop in front of me? Look at this idiot. Have you ever had that? Of course you've had it. So that is the sole purpose, not sole purpose, but the purpose of the amygdala. It warns you. So when you watch TV, how do they get into your mind? How do they not be just something like you see going there, advert? They must load it with fear. They must make it so urgent that your amygdala stands up and say, wow, man, I need to react to this. Otherwise, I'm going to be in trouble. And the more you watch this, the more the amygdala gets trained. I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. I must be aware. And that's what makes us nervous. That's what gives us anxiety. And we all know after anxiety, too much anxiety gives depression. Depression leads to all sorts of other kinds of things. So the mental toolkit for me is stay away from media. For 8 years in my life, I haven't had a TV. I don't have one. I would go on to News 24 and things like and allow them to program me. And when I leave there, I feel crap. I was going to say I feel like shit, but I really feel like I don't like this because they have given me reason to fear. You have given them permission to give you reason to fear. I think it was Peter Sage that said, if you are in the Amazon and you've got a flashlight, wherever you shine the flashlight, you're going to see danger. You're going to see anacondas, you're going to see anything. And what they do, the media, and I'm not going against the media here. I've ranted about this many times in my life. I am going around the media. It is terrible. They put the flashlight on the stuff that will make you fear. So stay away from media if you want to have a good life without fear. The next one, the mental toolkit, is called personal alignment. So the one thing that we can do is to say, I make a choice. I choose not to engage in this way. I choose not to engage in fear. I choose not to engage of negativity. But we all know that making the choice is 5%. The other 95% is willpower. And after willpower, or with willpower, you've got your whole belief system and your value system. So I can't remember what year it was, maybe 1994. I speak to a group of engineers, first time in my life, big group, 200 of them. I go on stage, I'm supposed to speak for an hour. I go and stand there and the curtains open and it's my time, my slot to speak, and I can't get a word out. The person comes to me that organized the event. He said to me, Rinus, are you going to speak? I said, yes, I'm ready. Let me go again. Can't get a word out. That night I went home without speaking. Needless to say to you, I didn't get paid. Moral of the story is, I made the decision I was going to speak. But deep inside of my mind was a belief system that said, you are Afrikaans. You've got a degree in psychology. These guys are engineers. You are not worthy. My belief system prohibited me from acting out the choice I made to speak. So you may say to yourself in tough times, I'm going to now go on diet. This whole thing about COVID, I've eaten too much, which I've done, and I'm an emotional eater. So I'm now going to go on diet. At nighttime, when I go to bed, I'm not going to get up again to go and eat. I'm going to sleep. That's your choice. But you've forgotten about the fact that you've got emotional trouble. You've forgotten about the fact that you are worried about your bond going off the end of the month. You've forgotten about the fact that you have issues with life at the moment. And then 12 o'clock comes and you say, yo, if I can just get something to eat. And then you go against your decision. So aligning yourself personally is like, again, being on a train. The train is going in one direction. You walking in the opposite direction. Do you think you can arrive at a different point than the train? No. So sometimes our mind says to us, we should be doing this. We should be getting ready. We should be making those cold calls while we can. We should be getting some information. We should be out there being successful. But something too big is holding us back, ladies and gentlemen. What is that something? And until you align your belief system, your values, and with values, I do not mean those things like honesty and things like that, those beautiful values. I literally mean the things that you value most. If you value most to be free, to walk outside without a mask, you're going to try that. Although you may say, I will comply, but there's something in you say, I will not do that, because you will only be true to your highest value. So you cannot really change, and you cannot really embrace change, and you cannot really move forward and become extremely successful the way you want to, unless you have dealt with those belief systems and those values for your sake to move forward. So that alignment for me is extremely important. That is a mental tool that I check often. If I want something in my life, am I aligned? Is there something holding me back or could hold me back to get that? Second last one, a new neurological pathway. I have to credit somebody for this, and that is Dr. Joe Dispenza. If you haven't looked at his work, please go and look at his work. It's amazing. Joe Dispenza. Joe Dispenza has come up with amazing ways to reprogram this neurological highway. So let me give you an example. Beautiful girl dates a guy with a red Golf, and the guy sees her every weekend, and they've been going out for a year or so, and they've got a fairly okay relationship, but he's fairly abusive, and she's considering to drop him. She drops him, and he comes to the house. He makes a big scene. She says, okay, I'll take you back. They are getting into trouble. Every time he comes to the house, he comes with his red Golf. She eventually decides, well, that's it. I'm going to break up with him. She's free for about 2 or 3 or 4 months. I don't know how long. And then she finds a new guy, and he is coming to visit Friday night. Friday night, he drives into the driveway with the red Golf. Oh, yeah. Everything that's happened to her before is right there. So, ladies and gentlemen, we 90% live on memory. When you wake up in the morning, before you look at your cell phone or whatever, you are already in memory mode. You are in the mode, as you open your eyes, you say to yourself, this is what I'm going to do today. And did I do it right? What did I do yesterday? Well, you start going through memory. That's why you have a brain. There's nothing wrong with that. But what happened in your life before will determine how you'll be acting in the future. Because if you want to know how successful you are today, you have to look at what you did yesterday. And if you want to know how successful you will be tomorrow, you'll have to look at what you will do today. But if you today base your actions on yesterday, then your future will be an extension of yesterday and today. So creating this new neurological highway means that I need to take the past and do 2 things. Number one, I need to restrict it to the past. And from there, I need to extract what was valuable for me. Then I have to create literally my future. Now, we know this for a fact. The mind does not know the difference between today, yesterday, tomorrow. So if you tell it something with conviction, and you say, this is what I am doing, this is the place I'm going, I'm projecting there, the strategy is going in this direction. You infuse yourself with enough energy and positivity. The brain actually picks it up as true for the moment. And in that moment, you are creating that new pathway in the brain. My old trick is, if I say to you now, imagine you go into your kitchen. Imagine this, and you take a fresh lemon, and you cut the lemon, and you smell that lemon. It's a beautiful smell. And you take that half a lemon, and you squeeze that lemon into your mouth. And if I do this with enough animation, and you play along, they could literally measure more saliva in your mouth. You could you can feel it, you can taste it. In the same way that when you have a dream that you're running in front of a train, and when you wake up, you're tired, you're out of breath. your body reacted exactly in that way. So we know it's possible to take the mind right now and create that new neurological pathway for yourself, infusing it with energy, with positive energy, with positive thought. And that's how we create this new way. So after we've gone through what we've gone through, we will have to create new pathways. We will have to get rid of those old ways of going back to the past, extracting from that which we think it's important, and projecting it into tomorrow. Because we want better lives, we want to grow. And if we want to grow and we want better lives, we have to let go of that past. I'm very guilty of that. I have lived for many years in my past. I've had a good past. But I also know that I'm wasting the moment. And in this moment is the only thing I've got. Anything there or anything there is not within my reach. This is within my reach. Here I can do it. And if I can create something powerful here, it will take me into the future. To end off with, for me, the key for success is most definitely the willingness to learn. I set myself free in life when I found out that whatever happens or happened to me was there for a reason. And the only reason is for me to grow. The reason is for me to see myself in a different light, to maybe work on my ego, make it smaller, to work on my compassion, make it bigger, to work on the way that I engage with people and with clients to make it more efficient. But if I do not extract from difficult times the learning, then those difficult times are really useless. Then you've gone through it only for pain. They say that suffering has got two consequences. It delivers pain and it delivers learning. You need to choose what you're going to do with your pain. Is it going to stay in your pain body and you're going to refer back to that as the most horrible time or the most horrible experience you've ever had? Or you're going to extract from that pain body the learning and become a better person? And I say to myself often, thank you, 2020, because I have grown. I've seen things, my blind spots have been exposed, and that is good. So let me complete the session with a story of that is good. There was this king who had a wise man that lived with him. And every time the king did something that was not right or he had a disappointment, the wise man will say to him, "Sir, that's good." And then the king in due time will see that this works out perfectly. And he praised the wise man often for his wisdom to see that everything that happens for the good. And one year, the king and this wise man went hunting. And when the king pulled the rifle backfired and he lost his thumb. And the king was standing there bleeding without his thumb. And the wise man said to him, "Sir, that is good." And the king got very angry. He said, "How can you tell me if I've just lost a limb that this is good? You are talking nonsense. I want you to be locked up and I want you to go and think about this thing about this is good." They locked him up. And the next year, the king went hunting by himself because the wise man was in jail. A tribe of cannibals got hold of the king. And they were going to eat him. And they had him there on the ground. They were busy preparing the fire. And the chief cannibal walked around him and he said, "Oh, what a beautiful piece of meat. And we're going to have an excellent time." And then when he walked around to his hand, he saw that the king didn't have a thumb. And in their tribe, eating someone without all of his limbs was a bad omen. And he said to the people, "Cut him loose. He hasn't got all of his limbs. Let him go." And they cut the king loose, and the king went immediately to where he locked the wise man up. He let him out. He said, "I am sorry. I've now seen that this losing of my thumb, it's good. I'm so sorry that I locked you up." The wise man said, "No, sir. I'm very happy that you locked me up." He said, "Why?" He said, "No, it's very good that you locked me up. Because if you didn't lock me up, I would have gone hunting with you. and I've got all my limbs. So things work out for the best. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for enduring us on this new platform. I hope you smiled here and there. I hope you got something of use. If you didn't, like I always say, I've already been paid. Thank you very much. I'm joking. I love working with estate agents, maybe because, like you, every month I start with a clean slate. And that takes some guts. And you've got guts. I've got the utmost respect for what you do. And let's just go forward. Let's just make this 2021 a really great year. We've got great tools that we got in 2020. All the best. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We would like to thank Rinus for his insightful discussion and speech. I think we can really take some pearls of wisdom and use it in our day-to-day business. So thank you very much, Rinus. We look forward to the other sessions as well. I'm going to remind you, my co-director, Roman Shaw's, his contribution would be on the 12th of March. Next Friday, same time, same place, and he will couple up with Rinus as well. And then we've got the last session on the 19th of March, where my co-director Eddie Smith would be coupling up with Rinus as well. So thank you very much for your time. We know you've got a busy schedule, and we wish you all the best. Thank you.